Hello, hello. I'm reading the book Frank Baler Finds T.H. for you, and Frank asked me to make a few comments because some of these passages are obscure. He acknowledges that he wrote them in a very obscured, occult sort of way, and he asked me to come in and read it and explain passage by passage. So if you are following us and reading the physical copy of the book, we are on page 44, and we're going to continue reading. Just to make it easier to hold, I'm reading off of the Kindle version, which, by the way, should be free on Amazon right now. If you happen to pick up a copy of the book on Amazon, you may want to put in a review for us. That would be really helpful. They're discussing the lesson hidden in the story of Abraham, and Frank continues narrating. He says, this couple was wise. He's referring to John and Priscilla, whom he went to see for this crisis. This couple was wise, and I felt we had a lot of growth to accomplish together, but I was uneasy with the religious terminology and symbology. The whole notion of sacrifice had nearly cost me my life again, I thought. I have been sacrificing in the name of God for about 600 years that I can remember. Somehow the Father, the Abba, the true God, cannot be about more sacrifices. Here, Frank Baler clearly is making reference to past lives of his in which he remembers some of the very similar things that happened in his current life. You are correct, John said. Was he reading my mind? I asked myself, or am I so deranged that I spoke my thoughts aloud, not realizing it? You have to realize that Frank Baler was not feeling well at that time, and a lot of these things, he wasn't sure. Was this guy reading my mind, or was I speaking aloud and not realizing it, right? It did not matter, because he continued, Joseph was second in command of Egypt. He was joyous, serving the community, and he saved Israel from famine. Yes, but not before he was humiliated, betrayed, and jailed, Priscilla added again seamlessly. Humiliation through betrayal seems to follow all mystics, I added. Is that the mechanism whereby the power of the ego over the inner self is defeated? I asked quizzically. Well, yes. Some mystics need to break the bond, so they choose humiliation as a mechanism. Betrayal is simply the tool that creates humiliation most effectively, John said. So here we're getting into some of these mechanisms, and a lot of people in this lifetime, they go through these processes where there's humongous humiliation, betrayal, and you ask, how is it even possible that somebody would do something like this? People suffer quite a bit. And one of the explanations is this idea of the soul contracts that Marianne Williamson talks about, the idea that before we're born, we kind of make a deal with ourselves. I want to experience these kinds of things. And one of the things that we need to do is be able to break the bond between the ego or the human personality and the inner self. And one way to break that bond is profound humiliation through betrayal, because the human person goes into a crisis, and depending on the magnitude of the betrayal, there's no way out of it. And the person essentially dies. If they die physically, well, they liberated themselves. If they die metaphorically, whatever emerges out of that, symbolized in the myth of the phoenix, then that part of us that emerges is a renewed being. So, the ultimate sense of betrayal and defeated and humiliation is the story of Jesus, right, where he would actually have died on the cross and resurrected. And that may or may not be symbolic. This is something that we may discuss later in the book. But the point is that you have an example there of the liberation of the Christ from the body of the man Jesus through the process of death following betrayal and humiliation in various ways. So I see it, I continued, and jail is analogous to the desert where Jesus prayed, an embryonic period hidden from public view so that the new man can be made. It is an opportunity to purify oneself, such as what Mandela chose. I would not say publicly that Nelson Mandela chose jail because he will be misunderstood. Mr. Mandela was unjustly incarcerated in the physical plane, but his soul needed that experience to purify the man so he could accomplish his mission of unification later, she said, Priscilla said. And I am in a metaphorical jail cell now, I continued, just like Papini's character. I built my own cell to find myself. So I had to look this up actually, and there is a reference here in the book to Papini. So Giovanni Papini was a writer. He was writing after the Second World War, Italian writer, short story writer. I forgot the year that this particular story was written. I think it's 1957, could it be? 1957, maybe, this particular story called The Jailer, his own jailer. No, I'm sorry. Giovanni Papini lived between 1881 and 1956. This particular story was published in 1922. In this story, there is a man who's very wealthy, very intelligent, and his parents die. And he decides to have a few adventures in life, and he does everything he wants. You know, he's wealthy, he's intelligent, doesn't need to work, his parents are dead. That reflects the idea of morality. There's no morality, there's nobody to answer to, and he does everything he wants to. Eventually he gets bored, there's nothing else for him to do, but he still seeks adventure. So this young man decides to kill someone for the thrill of it. So he picks a victim, studies the person's life, eventually kills that person. Because he's wealthy and intelligent and the way he perpetrated the crime, nobody even suspects him. So the thrill wears off and he kills another person. Eventually, I believe in the story, he killed something like 8 people. And one day, he goes to a store to buy something, hands the clerk some money, and the person looks at him in the eyes and say thank you very much as he returns the money, the change. The character in the story, this is a fictional story, says that he thinks that this man, the clerk in the store, knows that he was the killer of those 8 people. So he feels really guilty. He goes home and holds a trial in his head. It's a very interesting story. In his head, he's both the jury, the public defender, the attorney, the prosecutor. I mean, he's everybody, right? He's the judge, everybody. He's everybody in his head. And he finds himself guilty of murder and assigns himself 30 years in jail, a sentence of 30 years in jail. So he buys a house in the country, has the house modified or, to build bars around the windows and the doors, hires a jailer to bring him water and bread once a day, but not let him out. And then he tells the jailer, I'm going to pay you well. You have to bring me water and bread once a day for 30 years. But if you tell anybody I'm here, or if you let me out, I'll kill you too. So this is the deal. Anyway, year after year he's there, and after a few years he begins to hallucinate. He's alone in the small house and just some bread and water once a day. And in his hallucinations he begins to see each one of the people that he had killed. Interestingly, each one of these people thank him for having killed them. They essentially tell him that they wanted to die but didn't have the guts to kill themselves. So they thank the character in the story for killing them. And so they make peace, one by one. Eventually, he makes peace with all of his victims. So the next day, no food comes in, the jailer doesn't come in, and the next day. So anyway, he's now dying of hunger and thirst until one day he hears a woman approaching. The woman opens the door, comes in, and says, "Oh my gosh, you're actually here." He says, "Yes, I'm here. What do you mean?" He says, "No, my husband died with everybody in town thinking that he was crazy because he used to tell everybody that he was responsible for keeping a man in jail. In fact, he would disappear every day and he would tell us that he had to go feed this man that he was keeping in a jail cell. Nobody believed him, nobody understood him. We all thought that he was crazy. Eventually, he just died and nobody ever believed him. But it's actually true. You're here, you exist." After he died, the wife said, "I just wanted to come in and see for myself," but I guess he was right. So it's very interesting in the story because it's almost as if that guilt for having killed all those people got transferred somehow, almost like a virus, to this man who was hired to keep the assailant in his own made-up jail. But what's interesting is that we do all kinds of things and we think that we get away with it, right? We think that the world belongs to people who are wise and we can do whatever we want as long as we get away with it. We say all of that. And on the surface, it may be true until a person has a mysterious illness that nobody can figure out how to cure, until a loved one dies needlessly or unexplainably, until a business is lost or some other tragedy happens and we cannot quite figure out why these really bad things happen. And yet we claim that as long as we're smart about what we can get away with in life, it's okay because the world is for takers, for smart people. And while this may be a valid point of view, I'm here to propose that you consider the alternate point of view. I would like to propose that there is a perfect accounting system in the universe, if that's the right metaphor. But the accounting system of the universe is actually carried out within ourselves at the level of the conscience. However, the place in the mind where that accounting system is taking place is not immediately available to us. It is what we call the unconscious. This is why the character in Papini's story suddenly had a panic attack when he went to purchase something and he handed a man a bill and the man looked at him, thanking him while returning the change, and the character thought, "This man knows that I'm guilty." So there's something that comes up from the subconscious mind, from the unconscious, that alerts us to the fact that we are stashing debts away. And I don't mean physical, monetary debts. I mean moral in some cases and emotional debts in some way. Because whenever we do something that creates pain for someone else, that pain, what do you think happens to that pain? That pain has to be balanced somehow. We need to learn not to harm one another. We need to learn not to harm one another. I do not believe that the universe wants to harm us or punish us for the mistakes that we all make, but I do believe that we need to learn the consequences of our own actions, and in some cases, we ourselves put ourselves in situations that create pain for us, unconsciously, of course, so that we can learn not to do that again. The next time that something happens to you that makes you very uncomfortable, the next time that something hurts you or someone hurts you, tell yourself this, and tell me if this makes any sense to you. And I'd like for you to put comments below and tell me how you feel about this. Tell yourself this: "Oh my gosh, now I know how it feels. It feels really bad. I wonder then ask yourself, have I ever created the same type of pain for someone else?" So let's say, for instance, that you're at work and somebody in your team humiliates you in front of the group, in front of the team. Let's just say, I'm making up this example, right? You have a team of 10 employees in a company, and you're discussing a project or a few tasks, and one of them gets up and humiliates you. Yeah, because you haven't done your part, and you haven't delivered this, and you haven't done that, whatever the case is, humiliates you in some way, and you feel really embarrassed. Just imagine that. Tell yourself mentally, wow, now I know how it feels. Then, right after that, ask yourself, have I ever done that to someone else? It does not mean that you humiliated somebody in the same work team, in the same company, in the same scenario. But in the past, have you ever humiliated anybody? It could have been a friend in high school 20 years earlier. Have you ever humiliated anyone? And if you do remember an instance in which you humiliated someone, you say, okay, thank you. Now I learned what it feels like. I'll never do that again. And this commitment not to harm others is one aspect of what we call spiritual evolution. I'm so happy that you're here. Keep on subscribe to the channel so that you can continue receiving these videos. Thank you and blessings.